Welcome to the Maritime Executives podcast series, In the Know. I'm Tony Munoz, Editor-in-Chief. Our Executive Corner podcast will provide conversations with top executives concerning events and issues that are shaping our industry today. We will also bring you up to speed with the latest news and editorials covered by the Maritime Executive.
Welcome to the Maritime Executive Magazine's podcast series, In the Know. I'm Paul Benecki. Today, I'm joined by Rachel Rhodes, a project scientist at UCSB's Benioff Ocean Science Laboratory, and Jess Morten, program director of California's Marine Sanctuary Foundation Blue Whales and Blue Skies program. And today, they're going to tell us a bit about how voluntary slowdowns can help prevent whale strikes and reduce pollution at the same time. So just to start off with, do you guys want to just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do?
My name is Jess Morten. I'm the Director of Marine Resource Protection at the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And for the last 9 years, along with my role at the foundation, I've also served as an affiliate with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. And in that role with NOAA, I help to coordinate and support the West Coast region's whale conservation work, including on implementing a lot of policy to reduce the risk of ship strikes on endangered whales. And I'm joined here today by my partner and colleague, Rachel Rhodes.
Thanks, Jess, and thank you guys so much for having us. I'm a scientist at the Benioff Ocean Science Laboratory, and we're an applied marine research group based at UCSB. I have a background in environmental science and coastal marine resource management, and I've been leading our project called Whale Safe, which really works on reducing ship strikes by providing real-time whale data to ship captains and crews in our coastal waters here in California, as well as doing some vessel analytics, sort of tracking vessels in these areas where they're being asked to slow down for whale conservation.
Great. Well, thanks both of you for joining us today. And so just to start off with a little bit, what is the Blue Whales and Blue Skies program, and how did it start?
Sure. I'll take this one and then I'll pass it to Rachel to add more if she has anything she wants to pitch in. But the Protecting Blue Whales and Blue Skies program is a voluntary and incentive-based vessel speed reduction program based in California. And ultimately, what we do is we work with vessel operators, container, car carrier, tanker, and bulk carrier vessels to take action to reduce ship strike risk on endangered whales, decrease air emissions, and also limit underwater noise. And we do all of this by engaging ocean-going vessels to cooperate with speed reduction requests in these key areas off of the California coast. We use AIS vessel tracking data to verify their performance across these areas. And we quantify their environmental benefits associated with these reduced speeds. And then once we do that, once we quantify the benefits and we look at their cooperation levels, we also provide incentives. We provide positive press and recognition to the shipping lines that cooperate at a high level. And this is something we've now just had our 10th year of implementing this program. We began this effort back in 2014, and it started as a partnership between NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, some air quality agencies based in California, and then NGO partners. And again, the whole point was to try to encourage vessel operators to reduce speeds in these key areas, because about 10 years ago, the requests that were in place that were voluntary didn't have a high level of adherence. A lot of the vessels that passed through these areas that were asked by NOAA, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Environmental Protection Agency to reduce speeds chose not to do so. And so that's when these partners, this sort of unlikely coalition of partners that includes NOAA and the air quality agencies, got together to see if they could incentivize these operators to reduce their speeds. And so 10 years later, turns out the idea works really well. I'm happy to report we've seen huge expansions in terms of industry engagement and cooperation with this effort since that first season. Back in 2014, we had 7 shipping lines choose to sign up and participate in this effort. We've had 49 shipping lines in this most recent season in 2024 sign up and participate. And we've seen really major growth in terms of cooperation as well. prior to 2017, we were looking at cooperation levels that were closer to 20 to 25%. And now, again, if we look to the most recent season in 2024, cumulatively, the shipping lines that chose to participate in this program had a cooperation level of 85%. So it's been really exciting to see what was sort of a policy experiment back in 2014 grow and expand its impact in really meaningful ways.
I was just going to add a little bit of context too, for folks who might not be familiar with vessel speed programs put in place for whales. So here along the California coast, we have a lot of endangered whale species that come to feed and migrate through these waters every year. And some of these areas overlap with really busy shipping routes and entrances to ports. So one of the best mitigation measures we have put in place or can use is asking ships to slow down to 10 knots or less, which helps reduce the likelihood and the fatality of a ship strike when it does occur. So it's kind of our best sort of mitigation tool that we've got in place here along the California coast. And vessels are asked to slow down during the peak months that we have whale aggregations in these waters. And right now it's from an area that basically spans from Point Dune almost all the way up to Point Arena. So, it's a huge area of the California coast that kind of has this overlap with a lot of ship traffic, but also a lot of whales visiting these waters every year.
Well, it sounds like you've had a lot of impact so far. Do you want to tell me a little bit about the specifics of that impact, like how much emissions are reduced and how many whale strikes you think are averted?
Sure, yeah. Happy to report that the impacts are pretty enormous, especially considering it's a relatively simple concept. Slowing vessels down actually has really big payoff in terms of environmental benefits. And so, as I mentioned before, we work each season at the end of each season to not only quantify what cooperation across the shipping lines looks like in these areas, these vessel speed reduction zones, but we also spend time working with research analysts at groups like the Scripps Institution of Oceanography to actually quantify what the environmental benefits are associated with that change in behavior. And so across the last 10 years of implementing this program, we've had over 50 shipping lines reduce their speeds for over 1.5 million nautical miles in these important whale habitats. And it amounts to, again, pretty amazing environmental benefits, including greenhouse gas emission reductions. We've had reductions for greenhouse gases of over 150,000 metric tons in the 10 years we've run this program. It also contributes to really significant NOx or nitrogen oxides emission reductions in these areas, which is a main contributor to smog and impacts coastal air quality. We've seen major impacts or reductions in NOx reductions in the past 10 years of over 4,500 tons. And then we actually work with teams to measure what the underwater noise reductions are associated with these vessels traveling at reduced speeds in these areas. And we've seen, on average, for participating vessels in this program, we see a reduction of 5.4 decibels per participating transit, which is pretty significant. And then in terms of ship strike risk, really hard to know exactly how many ship strikes are being avoided because there's so many ship strikes that we're not seeing because this is all happening out at sea, and a lot of whales, if they are getting hit, are sinking after they're getting hit and killed. But we do work with modelers to estimate reductions in risk. And we find that with these research groups, we're estimating that we're reducing risk by about 50% to endangered whale species like blue and humpback whales in these areas. And again, like I said before, we're seeing more and more shipping lines sign up and commit to these efforts every year and cooperate at higher and higher levels, which basically means we're more likely to see even more positive impacts in the ways that I just outlined in years to come.
That's great. That's really good news. So what was the level of participation like last year, and how has it grown?
Yeah, I'll talk about blue whales, blue skies, and then maybe ask Rachel to talk about large vessel traffic as a larger category. But in 2024, we as a program saw a record number of shipping lines choose to sign up and participate in the effort. Like I said before, we had 49 global shipping lines. That's up from 33 in the 2023 season. So we had 49 companies committing to reducing their fleet speeds to this 10 knots or less target speed for over 425,000 nautical miles in 2024. And ultimately, it came out to 85% in terms of cooperation. So 85% of their total cumulative distance across those vessel speed reduction zones was traveled at 10 knots or less. And these are pretty large areas off of California, not large compared to the full transit distance that these ships are covering. But in total, that 425,000 nautical miles equates to traveling around the circumference of the globe 20 times. So it's pretty significant in terms of the effort cumulatively across these global shipping lines. And again, I think pretty amazing to see also when you consider that most of these shipping lines, especially the container lines, were traveling at speeds of 14 to 16 knots prior to signing up. So that distance really represents a major change in behavior and a commitment from industry to do so.
For sure. So whale safe as well. Do you want to give us some details about participation there?
Yeah, so all large vessels are asked to slow down. So anything that's 300 gross tons or larger. And so the Blue Whales, Blue Skies program is capturing a huge chunk of this traffic, but of course, not all carriers are participating or signing up to get involved. So looking at the numbers more holistically from just all ship traffic that falls into that 300 gross tons or larger, we're seeing over close to 1.5 million nautical miles traveled in these kind of whale safety zones. And the overall cooperation is close to 70%, which is still great. Of course, you're seeing a higher cooperation with the Protecting Blue Whales, Blue Skies participants because they're really committing to slowing down. And we want to get, even more folks involved, but it's still, I think, really hopeful to see as a whole, those numbers are increasing even outside of the Protecting Blue Whales, Blue Skies program. So it seems like every year we're getting incrementally higher and higher. We, of course, want that overall cooperation to really be 90 to 100% to see the full kind of conservation benefits, but it's still really encouraging to see.
That's great. Do you think that maybe Blue Whales, Blue Skies participants are sort of setting a standard for everybody and, providing an example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really encouraging to see some of these companies step up and be leaders in the industry in terms of how they're approaching whale conservation and really prioritizing this in their operations. You're seeing some of these companies get close to 95 to 100% cooperation throughout the season, which is really amazing to see among some of these. Not only are they getting such high cooperation, but they're some of the highest, largest total nautical miles, or the companies that are traveling quite frequently through these zones. So it's very exciting to see.
So how can shipping stakeholders get more involved and how can it benefit them?
Well, I guess on the Blue Whales, Blue Skies program front, like Rachel was mentioning, at this point, we're lucky that we have most of the major players in terms of global shipping enrolled in this program. Especially, we have most of the major container and car carrier lines that call on California ports at this point. About 90% of the container and car carrier traffic that comes to California is coming in on ships that are already voluntarily participating in this initiative. But the capture rate, that 90% capture rate, drops pretty significantly to levels around 20% when we look at other vessel categories, other vessel types that are eligible for enrollment in this program. And that includes types like tanker and bulk carrier vessels. And so we're really focused in 2025 and beyond on trying to engage more of those categories of shipping lines, tanker and bulk carrier operators, trying to get them to sign up and be a part of this effort as we head into a new season in 2025. And the good news is it's really easy to do. In a few weeks, we're going to be announcing the 2025 Blue Whales, Blue Skies season. We'll make enrollment materials available on our website, which is bluewhalesblueskies.org. And really all we need from interested vessel operators and parties is to download our enrollment agreement, fill out one page with contact information and a signature, and send it back to us. And after that, it's really up to them to decide if and how much to get their fleet involved, reducing their speeds in these areas. There's no penalty for signing up and not cooperating, but we only provide positive press and recognition, the incentive of this program, to the shipping lines that volunteer to cooperate for at least 50% of their total distance in these areas across the season that we set. But we do make it as easy as we possibly can, and we'd love to see even greater rates of enrollment in 2025.
There's also some other ways some stakeholders could get involved. If you're not a ship owner, for retailers and brands, we also have an ambassador program. So that's a really simple way to support more sustainable shipping. So companies are committing to use at least one of the participating carriers in the Blue Whales Blue Skies program. And they can either do that directly or through a freight forwarder. So that's a way that they can have an impact on sustainable shipping and really start thinking about biodiversity as in their supply chain. It's not something I've thought a lot about as a consumer. We don't often think about roadkill happening out at sea or some of these other environmental impacts, but I think it's exciting to see companies are really starting to recognize this as an important thing to consider.
And for shippers, for retailers, is there like a logo that they can use or something to recognize their participation in the program and tell the public about it?
Yeah, exactly. So there's different, similar to how we're providing that information for our shipping companies in terms of the environmental benefits. There's all sorts of data and communication kind of toolkit that the program will provide.
Great. Yeah, that really matters from a business perspective, right? If it's consumer facing and if it affects the bottom line for the shipping companies, of course, that's a fabulous incentive. Shipping executives love to get together and join in on charitable partnerships. Is there a social aspect to this as well? Are there meetings or like an annual gala or something?
Great and timely question that I'm glad you're asking. We actually haven't had an in-person gathering in quite some time. We haven't really had the funding for the program to put together an award ceremony the way that we felt like it was needed. But this year we plan to bring that back. And so in April of this year, we will have an award ceremony where we bring the award level shipping lines together and a lot of our research partners together. And we give out awards and provide information and really just provide opportunity for people to reflect on the positive change that's been achieved over the course of the 2024 season. So that's one opportunity for Blue Whales Blue Skies as a program. And then there, I would say, are increasing opportunities. More and more, I'm seeing more industry-led conferences and workshops and forums being set up to bring shipping industry leaders together to talk through not only the ways that they can adopt more sustainable practices from an emissions standpoint, but also think about biodiversity protections and whale protection specifically. And so one great industry leader on that front is World Shipping Council, which represents a lot of the container traffic that comes to California. They've really done a great job at bringing, again, world leaders of these different shipping lines together to be more aware of the opportunities that exist for their shipping lines to cooperate with environmental initiatives like Blue Whales Blue Skies.
Yeah, that's great. So do you see this model maybe spreading globally or at least within the United States to other areas?
Totally, yes. And that's something that I think we're talking about more and more as we see the success of what's been done in California. I've been really encouraged by the commitments I've seen over the past few years from the shipping industry on biodiversity-related efforts and protections. I think there is a lot of momentum, and I think there are a lot of places around the world where ship strike risk is high, but where protection measures are not in place. And so more and more our team is looking to partner with groups that are working on the ground in different regions to identify areas that maybe would benefit from measures like vessel speed reduction or rerouting ships away from sensitive habitats. And then looking to see, once those measures are in place, whether a program like Blue Whales Blue Skies, which really comes as a complement to motivate industry to cooperate at a higher level by offering that recognition, we're trying to see where we can also offer that skill set to places where measures are already implemented. And one example is the East Coast of the United States. There's actually mandatory speed reduction areas down the eastern seaboard to protect a critically endangered population of whales known as the North Atlantic right whale. And right now, despite the fact it's a regulation, compliance actually varies pretty widely across the different zones that are created on that coastline. There's some areas where compliance is extremely high. They're in the 90% or above range. And then there's some areas where it's lower and it's closer to 60%. And so we think that there is potential benefit of a program like Blue Whales, Blue Skies that can actually offer a carrot or an incentive to these shipping operators to comply with these regulations, because it brings value to their brands to do so. And so that's something we're talking more and more as a team about.
It's also worth mentioning, a lot of these companies that we have visiting our coastal waters here in California are global. So they're also visiting all of those East Coast ports as well. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of the folks we'd be working with.
I'm sure our readers would also be interested to know a little bit about the role that data and monitoring plays in encouraging compliance. There are so many tools that can be used for tracking ships now and monitoring patterns. Rachel, do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how ship owners respond to that kind of feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of our role, I lead our Whale Safe project, which is separate from protecting blue whales, but we are a collaborator on the program and help provide some of these ship analytics, because it's really helpful, I think, to be able to provide more kind of real-time updates of how ships are doing in these zones. On our website, we're tracking vessel movement through the zones using AIS data and then calculating that sort of cooperation score based on how many of the total nautical miles in that zone was at the recommended speed knots. And I think it's helpful to kind of provide that data more often so that shipping companies can also know internally how they're doing throughout these zones. We recognize there's so much to keep track of and a lot of different things that shipping companies are balancing in terms of their logistics. This is perhaps just something a lot of folks don't really have time to investigate on their own. So by providing that data, we're hoping it's really giving them the toolkits or like the resources to keep track of that and perhaps make your own internal changes to increase cooperation. And we've worked closely with a few shipping companies and seen really massive improvements after they had that data on a more regular basis. I mean, of course, it's up to the individual company to really prioritize it, but we're hoping that by providing that type of data, it helps enable them to do it if they want to.
And then I'll just add too that I think what Rachel's team is offering is really special, and what the Blue Whales Blue Skies team offers in terms of data on performance is great, not just for the shipping lines themselves, but also just for the public and for global awareness on how these shipping lines are performing. As a program, we actually work pretty hard to make sure that we focus on the positive. So we spend a lot of time on marketing and positive press and recognition for the companies that are performing at a high level. And like we talked about, and Rachel mentioned with the ambassador program, there is an increasing appetite from the retail world, the customers world, the shippers and consumers to be able to know that the goods that they're relying on being transported by these shipping lines are being done in a sustainable and ideally a whale safe manner. And so that's something that I think the world is really benefiting from. 10 years ago, there was really no way to understand how different shipping lines were performing as it relates to whale safe operations. Now, thanks to the Blue Whales Blue Skies project and also the Whale Safe team, there is more transparency, which I really do think is an asset to these companies like MSC and CMA CGM that have chosen to prioritize doing these things. They can really take pride in that and sell themselves as a whale safe operation.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sure you both are very aware. A lot of these big operators have invested heavily in monitoring systems for both for weather routing and for tracking vessel speed and crew behavior, because it saves them fuel, right? So they very closely monitor exactly what their ship is doing and how fast it's driving, and they'll have an operations center that remotely tracks these things too. Do you know if any of them are automating this process, like maybe with a geographic overlay on their tracking system that says once you get to point X, you slow down, and they can watch that from afar and make sure it happens?
Yeah, it's something we've seen. Some companies are absolutely automating that. So we at least on the whale safe side, we are able to provide, and I know Jess's team does this as well, provide the coordinates for these zones and the spatial files so that, you know, companies, as you're saying, like their communication fleet centers or however they prefer to disseminate that information, they kind of have more control over that. So our thought is, try to provide as many different tools and ways of communicating this information so that folks can use it the way that is most useful for them. So we've seen some companies that are ingesting this information. We make it available through an API, which is an application programming interface. And so they can actually ingest it daily and see any updates to zones, which for us on the West Coast here in California, our zones are static. They're easier to plan around. They're typically, the same dates every year, just about, and the same spatial files. But on the East Coast, as Jess mentioned, some of those zones are dynamically created based on, acoustic and visual sightings. So it can be trickier to keep track of some of these zones in other places. So having those types of tools, I think, are super helpful, especially in those areas that it's a little bit harder to plan for. So it's something I certainly have seen some companies are doing exactly as you're saying, kind of handling that monitoring themselves, but really relying on some of the zone information to make that happen.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, that's something that we just wouldn't have been able to do as an industry 10 years ago. Things have changed so quickly in terms of how technologically sophisticated it's become. So it sounds like there are places where the industry is indeed taking action without support of government. That a lot of this is voluntary, that folks see the benefit in it, and they're doing that. Is that about correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, I think it's incredibly cool to see how industry can play a leadership role in actually moving these initiatives forward. In California, there is government involvement since NOAA, the Coast Guard, and EPA actually implement these voluntary requests that are put out in these areas in these timeframes. But there are also places around the world where there really is no government involvement, like you're suggesting, and we're still seeing industry really step up and take a leadership role in making them happen. And so one great example, there's multiple to point to, I should note, but one really great example is in Sri Lanka off of the port of Colombo. Basically, the shipping lanes south of that port overlap with really important feeding habitat for a blue whale population that lives there in the Indian Ocean. And research that was done years ago at this point by great scientists like Dr. Asha DeVos proved that relocating these shipping lanes, even just as little as 15 nautical miles to the south, really meaningfully reduces the risk of ship strikes occurring. And unfortunately, for a number of reasons, the Sri Lankan government has been hesitant to take official action to actually move the shipping lanes and go through an international maritime organization process to do so. But on the bright side, there have been NGOs that have really engaged global shipping lines to voluntarily do this, to relocate their vessels to these new areas, again, 15, 20 nautical miles south, to drastically reduce risk to whales. And after just a few years of industry leaders like CMA, CGM, and MSC doing these things, more and more shipping lines are starting to do the same thing. And I think last I saw, there's an estimated, I think it's a third of all of the traffic entering that port has now relocated to this voluntary routing scheme. And it's about 50% of the largest vessels visiting the port of Colombo that have rerouted to these new lanes south of the official TSS. So as you guys were talking about earlier, I like to think with some of these industry leaders that it's a bit of a domino effect, that if we get one or two of the major shipping lines proving and demonstrating that these things can be done without major impact to their bottom line, that more and more are going to start to say, well, hey, I can do that too. And in addition, I can actually see some benefit to my brand in taking on these sorts of things. And on another positive note, I think most of your audience and your listeners feel this, that I think most mariners are doing these things for the right reasons. At their core, most ship captains are nature lovers. At least that's been my experience communicating with the shipping industry. And nobody wants to contribute to the demise of beautiful animals like whales. And so beyond the fact that I think they see a business opportunity for their brands, I really do believe that industry feels good being able to adopt practices like these that, again, don't actually limit their operations, but contribute to really meaningful environmental benefits.
Yeah, and if your competitors are doing it, there's not a competitiveness issue, right? As soon as everybody's doing the same thing, why not, right? It doesn't cost you anything. So
Totally. Yep.
well, great. Thanks so much for the overview. I mean, it's really cool what you've pioneered and what you've taken forward here, and it sounds like there's a lot of takeaways for folks all over the place, not just in California. So yeah, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing more about it as the years go by.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. Catch you soon.